This is Lauren Kimball for ANI 150, and today we're going to begin part one of a tutorial series walking you through how to build a sci-fi crate. So to begin, we need kind of a sense of where we're starting, so some reference art. We can either create our own concept art to reference, or we could go onto the Google and see what's available, and that is what I did. I went and found this concept art here when I typed in sci-fi crate. I thought this was pretty cool. I don't know the artist, but I thank them for posting this online and being able to use this in this demo. Now, clearly, this isn't a project for money or anything, or that I would use in a, for a client. So this is just for learning. So we're only modeling this for learning. If this were something where I would want to use someone's concept art for an actual project, I would absolutely find them and get those permissions. But this is just for learning's sake. So I picked one of the sci-fi crates, specifically this one, because I thought it was neat. It was really appealing to me. And so first thing I did was I brought this into Photoshop, clearly. And then I unlocked the background layer, because when you bring in a JPEG or any other compressed image, it usually shows up as a locked background image. I converted it to a regular layer, and I changed its blending mode to multiply, so that anything I put beneath this layer, I will be able to see. And what I did was I color-coded the crate based on the base pieces that I would want. So technically I'd break this up into a few more things. This handle is going to be separate and these buckles are, but I was mostly thinking about, okay, do I want this all to be one piece? Do I want to break it up into multiple pieces? And ideally, I think multiple pieces is a better way to go for the sake of just the ease of modeling, and of course going back and laying out the UVs. It's all much easier if we just break it into pieces. So that's what I'm going to do. And these are the pieces that I went with. So I'm going to just sort of minimize my screen over here. Maybe close up this color menu. And yeah, just sort of have this open for reference so that I can look at it. And I'm going to go ahead and open up Maya. Now the background probably looks a little different. If you're just opening up Maya, typically it's a gray, but I found that in recording tutorials, not having enough contrast between the model and the background has been a little confusing. If you want to change your background to match mine on a Mac, like I'm on a Mac, you can press Option B, and oops, what's it not working? There we go. Option B will allow you to toggle through just some basic environmental colors. I believe it's Control B on a PC, but don't quote me because I'm not completely sure. I'm running a Mac. So I'm just going to go Option B to the gradient, because I think this is going to create a nice amount of contrast between like the generic gray Lambert when we start modeling. Okay, so whenever we're starting a project from scratch, the first thing we want to do is create a project directory so that we know where all of our saves are going. And when we get to the texturing part, we're going to know where our source images are, etc. So I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to go down to Project Window, and I'm going to create New. And I'll name this, well, Sci-Fi Crate, and I'll put it on the desktop. And all these default folders are just fine. Just press Accept. And of course, when we go check the desktop, there's the Sci-Fi Crate directory with all those folders. And everything we create is going to be saved to the Scenes folder. Okay? All right, so let's begin. So looking at this crate, my first thought is maybe let's just begin with a box. So I'm going to go to my Poly Modeling tab and just click on a cube. And I can press F. The F hotkey will bring whatever our selection is into focus. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about the measurements. I can go over here into my channel box. Now, if you don't have your channel box open, that's just a matter of pressing Control A to toggle between that and what's called the attribute editor. So these are, generally speaking, the two menus that you're going to be dealing with. Yeah, so if you don't see this, press Control A and it'll usually pop up. Now, in the channel box, we can see the default translation, rotation, scale values. And down here on inputs, this is where the history is going to go. So every time you do something to an object, you incur history. And right now, there's just this preset history when you create something. And I'm going to go ahead and edit this. So I'm going to begin by adjusting the width of this box. I'm thinking maybe 5.5, maybe something like that as far as the I guess I'm treating width kind of like length, but whatever. For height, I'm thinking maybe like 3, and we're gonna go with a depth of 4. Yeah, I kind of like that. That matches, I think. I'm eyeballing. Oftentimes, when you're given a bit of concept art on a project, sometimes you'll be given like a full breakdown model sheet of all the orthographic views, front view, side view, and you can bring in image planes and just model from that. Sometimes they just give you a general drawing, like a 2D drawing like this one over here, and then leave it up to the artist to interpret it. And we only have this one image, so I'm just doing the best I can based on what I see. All right, and I'm only paying attention to the blue. And the first thing that sticks out to me is this hard bevel on the top of my box. So to achieve that, I'm going to go ahead and use the bevel tool. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to go into edge mode. So that is one of the many component modes where you can go in and edit a polygon mesh. And this time I'm choosing edges, and I'm going to just marquee select, which means clicking off to the side and drawing a marquee box around my selection. And I'm going to let go. And you can see that there are all these edges selected. I'm going to rotate my view, and I'm going to hold down the control key. And notice that the mouse has a little minus sign that appears, because when you press control and you select part of your object, you're going to see that you can deselect whatever it is you have chosen. So if I press 4, which allows me to see a wireframe view of my model, we can see the selection above and the selection below. It should be a total of 8 edges. And when I look up here at my poly count menu, I can see I in fact have 8 edges selected. If you do not see this menu, it's a very helpful menu. You want to go up to display, heads up display, and activate the poly count. And that way you'll always know how many edges, vertices, faces you have selected at a given time. All right, I'm going to go ahead and press 5. And then I'm going to go to my neat little shortcut menu that exists in Maya. Just by holding Shift down and clicking on the right, you will be able to access this shortcut menu that changes based on what mode you're in. So if I was in object mode, I would see different things. If I had a NURBS cube out here, I would see different things. For a polygon cube that's in edge mode, these are my options. And I'm going to go to bevel edge. All right, so as you can see, it creates a pretty dramatic bevel. It's always got the same defaults, but these defaults will express themselves differently based on the scale and position of your object. So what I want to mess with is the fraction. These other things, these have different, all these little tools have different configurations on how it's going to affect your box. I like this type of bevel. I don't want to add more segments or depth. I just want to shrink it down so it matches the reference. So let's experiment a little. Let's go, we're at 0.5, let's try 0.3. Still a little thick, so let's try a little bit more. Let's try 0.1. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So I'm going to click off of that. Now if I wanted that menu to pop back up, what I would do is press T. Well, it's not working right now, but typically when you have an object, the last thing that you did in the channel box will often reactivate when you press T. Not in this instance. Oh, nope, there it goes. I just had to be in object mode first. So when I'm in object mode, I can press Q, which is my select tool. I can press W, which is move, E, rotate, R, scale, or T, which will open up the last thing that I did in my history. So if I clicked off of this too soon, and maybe I grabbed the move tool, but I want the bevel menu back, I can click T. Now, that menu will change based on the next actions I do, but for right now, that will reactivate this, and I could go in and add additional changes. All right, so the next thing I want to do is, looking over at this reference, I'm thinking I want to go ahead and put this indention in, this little side piece. So I'm going to go ahead and use my Insert Edge Loop tool. So I'm going to press Q, which opens the select tool, and I'm going to shift right or click on this in object mode, and I'm going to shift right click, and you'll see there's an insert edge loop tool. And now if I grab this, typically, let me make sure, reset tool. Okay, so typically when you grab it, you're able to click on your mesh either vertically or horizontally, and you'll be able to add edge loops as long as you've got a clear edge flow of quads. Edge loop tool does not like triangles very much, and it certainly doesn't appreciate n-gons, but nobody appreciates n-gons. We try to avoid them in this class. N-gons are any faces with more than 4 sides. So this is all quads, so the edge loop tool works really nicely. But if you double click a tool, in fact, if you double click any tool, you can go into their tool settings. And what I want to do is use the multiple edge loops and the equal multiplier, which I really like, and it's set to 2. So what does the equal multiplier do? Well, we've talked about this in class, but if you don't remember, it basically, you click on the mesh and you're able to create edge loops that are equal distance apart over a certain selection area. So this created 2 really nice edges for me to start with. I'm going to go ahead and close out of this, and I'm going to grab my move tool, which is, or I'm not my move tool, my scale tool, which is R. And what's cool about the scale tool is if you have 2 different selections, instead of scaling things, you can move things in opposing directions like this. So I'm looking at my reference picture, and I'm just trying to get a sense for how thick this side area is. And honestly, I think that looks pretty decent. That's a pretty good distance. Okay, cool. Now I want to do the top portion. That's a little trickier because it looks like this is narrower up here. This is less so on the bottom. So let's go ahead and just return this to its defaults. And we'll just, it looks like this is pretty much the same thickness, the bottom to the top. Or not the bottom to the top, bottom to the side. So I'll just kind of go here and make a bit of a square. All right, now where the lid breaks, it looks like that is also about the same distance. I want to say about a square, maybe a little more. And then this comes up a lot closer to that bevel. So just kind of adding that up here, kind of just eyeballing it, seeing what I like. I think that's about right. Because we got to account for the lip of where the lid is going to go, and we've got to also account for that divot that it's creating. So this whole indented area right here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and grab my move tool, which is W. I'm going to right click and go to face mode. So I'm no longer in edges, I'm now being able to select faces. And I'm going to click these 2 faces that represent this dark blue area over here. And if I hold down, now if I were just to grab my x-axis, this would move these 2 faces left to right. But if I hold down shift, you'll see that I'm able to extrude. In fact, the little word extrude appears. And I can let go because I like this. I don't have to have more extrusions. This is fine. And it looks like it's just kind of slightly indented. It's not very thick, but it's there. All right, so that's about it. Now, some of you might notice, hey, that's awesome and all, but you forgot the other side. Yeah, I could have grabbed these 2 and used the scale tool to squeeze these together, but I think what I'll do instead is only focus on one side of the crate and just get rid of the other side for now. So I'm going to double click this edge loop tool, grab the multiple edge loops and set it to 1. Now the reason, I mean, we're not doing multiple edge loops, but we can, by activating this, you activate the equal multiplier, which is putting everything equidistant on a surface. If you have only one edge loop and you click on a surface, no matter where you click it, like let's say I clicked it over here, boom, that edge loop is going to jump to the middle because it's going to cut in half, and that's what I want. Because ultimately what I'm going to do is once I finish modeling this side, I'm going to mirror the geometry so that I don't have to keep going back and making sure both sides are looking awesome. So what I'll do next is I'm going to close this window and I'm going to right click faces because faces are way more easier to delete than edges. So I'm going to go ahead and press spacebar, and that shows like all my viewport options. And let's just look at this thing from the front. All right, cool, cool. And I'm just going to grab these sides and delete. And so when I go back to my perspective view, you can see inside the mesh, and then you can see over here. Okay, so now that we've got that done, I'm going to go ahead and focus on adding that lid. Now it's a little hard to see the tessellation once I actually can't see the tessellation when I click off. And when I do that, especially with something that's just solid gray, the more detail we add, the harder it is going to be to see the details I'm making. So one helpful tip is to go up into shading and activate wireframe on shaded. And when you do that, even when you've clicked off of the object, you're able to see all the faces that you've added, and it just helps you kind of make creative decisions on what you're going to extrude next, etc. So the next thing I want to worry about is basically adding the lip to this lid. So, or not, just this indention that indicates that there's a lid. I don't actually want to model two separate pieces. You would if you were going to make a crate that opens and closes, but there's no requirement for that. I just want to make a neat crate. So we're just going to give the impression of there being two separate pieces. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go reactivate my edge loop tool, and I'm going to press reset. That way I have, free reign over where I place my edge loops. And I'm just going to click on this vertical line, which creates a horizontal edge loop. And I'm just going to bring this up pretty close to where I kind of marked the lid to be. And this is going to act as my divider for my lid. Okay, so that dividing space. And so what I'll do next is I'm going to right click and go to faces, and really important, make sure you press Q before moving forward. If you don't, then nothing's going to happen. My eye's going to be kind of confused, like, wait, you still have edge loop selected, because that was the tool I was still in. So it would have been frustrating, been like, hey, why is nothing working? It's because you didn't have the select tool. So I'm going to just zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to click this face, hold down Shift, and double click the face next to it. And that will tell Maya to go ahead and select all of the faces that are within that edge flow. All right? And now the next thing I'm going to do is extrude inward. I could grab my scale tool like this, and I could just extrude inward, but I don't want to do that, because if I did, all these angles, all these faces are just going to pull inward at a kind of a strange angle. So instead, I want to use my extrude tool for this. And that, yes, there is a tool completely separate from this, and it behaves a little differently. I'm going to hold down Shift, right click, and activate the extrude tool. And so this time, instead of using scale, I'm just going to click this blue arrow and pull inward. And as far as how far I should go, so I'm going to press like 4 and look at my wireframe. And now the arrow is kind of a yellow color. It doesn't matter. This is the arrow we want. I'm going to pull in, not so close that these edges are touching, but as far in as I can get it. Now, because, let's go ahead and go back to shaded view. Because this mesh doesn't have like, full polygons over here, it's cut in half. These edges, the edges on the very end, kind of extruded a little further than the rest. Like it kind of bent. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to delete this cap. Notice this little polygon face was created. That happens when you're extruding a face away from an empty area. It'll create more geometry. So I'm just going to delete that to begin with. And delete, see that there? That's what I'm going to click. So I'm going to delete. Because when I mirror geometry, that's going to be problematic. I don't want that. So what I'm going to do next, just to kind of, this wouldn't matter that much, but it'll bother me. I'm going to right click and go to vertices, and I'm going to grab these two vertices here, and you can always double check up here in your poly count menu to make sure that's the only thing you have selected. I'm going to press W, and I'm going to hold down the V key. What V key does, if you look up here, you'll see these magnets. So these are just snap to options, things like snap to grid or snap to curve. We're going to activate snap to vertice by holding down V. And if I grab the blue arrow and then I move the blue arrow over here, it's going to want to match the z-axis position of the vertices I'm hovering over. So see how nice and straight that is? I do that again over here. Just highlight these two verts, hold down my V, and snap, ask it to, match up the vertices on the z-axis by holding down that arrow. So now we've got this nice little indention. And if I press F8, or if you're on a Mac, function F8, you're able to see that nice edge that we've created, that nice lid. Now this would be a really good opportunity if you don't have increment save on to go ahead and save. I don't use increment and save that much because I like to add little notes to what I'm modeling. So this time I would type in like crate underscore 001 underscore, and this is the part that I would change and add a little note to remind me what I did. So I probably say something like crate start, or maybe make a note about lid, whatever. I'm just gonna put a little note on there so I have a general idea of what is in this iteration. Because if you have Maya constantly kicking out new iterations of this, you may not know what's going on in that save. So I like to put a little note to help save time on how many versions I have to open. Okay, so we got wireframe on shading activated. We've got the nice indention here, just like in the reference, and we've got this nice like indention for the lid of the crate. And so the next thing I want to do is add this secondary indention. These little ones up here I'm not going to bother with right now, because instead of going through the process of just adding a bunch of tessellation and then pushing that in, I think what I'll do is I will sculpt that onto the high poly later when we get to ZBrush. So there's lots of little details here, like you'll notice these little triangles over here, this triangle here. The TB4 looks like it's paint, so you can just add that to the diffuse map. A little circle and indention here. These little scrapes and lines, they can be added using ZBrush onto the high poly mesh, and we'll get to that in these tutorials. For right now, I'm more worried about the things that are really defined on the crate. Technically, I could also sculpt this in, but the polygon limit on this crate is like 1,000 polygons. We've got some room to add a little bit more in, so I want to go ahead and go for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm looking at it, and I think I'm going to go with the vertical lines first, and I'm going to click on my mesh, shift right click, insert edge loop tool, go to the little box next to it so that I can go in and basically choose some custom options. The multiply edge loops again with 2. I'm just going to click this. Alright, looks good. I'm going to grab these edge loops here, and I'm just going to push it to the side, basically lining it up about as wide as I think that is, just by eyeballing it. Doesn't have to be super perfect, just have to be in the ballpark. Yeah, that looks about right. Okay, so I'm going to do that again. This time I'm going to click on one of these vertical lines, which will create horizontal boxes. Okay, alright, I'm going to press my move tool, and I'm going to bring this up close to the lip. And I may go ahead and grab this and lower it just a smidgen, just so I feel like it matches the reference more. Alright, in looking at this closely, I see, so let's click on this and just sort of zoom in a little bit. You can see that this is beveled a little bit on these corners. At least that's how I interpret it. You could probably say it's not, but that's kind of how I see it. So I want to add that bevel to this before I extrude. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to go ahead and add a different set of these vertical edge loops by clicking on this horizontal line like this. Okay, and I'm going to extend this outward to about where I think that corner is. Looks about right. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this edge loop by double clicking, and make sure you've got the move tool on this time, and I'm going to hold down Control, and I'm going to deselect these 3 rings, okay, or not rings, these 3 lines right here in the middle. And then what I'm going to do is press 4. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm making sure that the only thing I have selected are those edges, and I didn't accidentally click on something else. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to maybe lower this a little bit, like, see how that kind of gives it that sort of beveled corner look there. And I think I'm also going to shift click these and expand them out a little further, because it's kind of a tiny corner. There we go. That looks like the picture to me. So what I'll do from here is I will grab my mouse and I will go to face mode, and I will go 1, 2, 3. Wrong one. If you click something wrong, you just press Control and deselect it. So hold down Shift, and remember Shift allows you to grab multiple things, right? And so I'm going to grab those 3 faces. I'm going to grab my move tool, hold down Shift, and just do the same thing where I just move this back ever so slightly, just as far back as I think it should be based on the reference image, and that looks about right to me. So I can go back into object mode and click off, and that I think looks pretty close to the reference. I can always go in and grab it. I would grab it by vertices at this point instead of grabbing it by edges. Just because these edges have been adjusted, and you're going to get less warping if you grab by vertices. So if I wanted to push this a little further, like maybe these edges were too far apart, what I could do is I could go into like the front view, or I guess in this case the side view, and I don't particularly want to use this side, so let's go to Panels, Orthographic, New, and I think this is the left side? Yeah, okay, so New Camera, so I'm going to have to go to Shading, Wireframe. Okay, now I can see this from the side. So I can sort of see this from the side. This is orthographic straight on from the left. I'm going to go ahead and right click and I'm going to grab it by its verts. And this way, if I press 4, I can kind of see what I'm selecting. Wait, do I want to select that? I don't think I do. I think I just want to select this. You don't have to do this step. This is just something I'm choosing to do. If I wanted to kind of narrow this a little bit, because maybe it was too wide. I like that better. So again, you don't have to do that step. It was just me showing you if you wanted to nitpick and it wasn't quite right, you can just grab it by the vertices. Just make sure you're not grabbing these inner lips here. Yeah, it looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and save this again. This time I'm going to name it crate 002. And I'm going to go ahead and say like handle indention, so I know what it is I've built. Alright, so speaking of handles, let's go ahead and model the handles real quick. I know this is already kind of a long tutorial, but this will only take a second. So to make the handles, I'm just going to go ahead and create a cylinder. I'm going to move it out here. I'm going to rotate it about 90 degrees so I can go into my channel box and type in 90. And then I'm going to go into its inputs, and I'm just going to take its radius and bring it down. Whoa, bring it down. That went way down. It's a bit too narrow. Let's try 0.1. That's a bit too thick. So maybe 0.05? Closer, maybe 0.03. This is a thin handle. I think that probably works. Let's go and look at this from the side view, and I'm going to go ahead and put in 5. Alright, I'm going to make sure that this is sitting roughly in the middle of that area that we've created. And it looks like it extends all the way to the edges of that indention. So I'll just go ahead and scale this out a little bit. Maybe bring it up slightly. Oh, that's about right. And then in this view, I'm going to make sure that it's hugging closer to this area. It looks like these little handles stick out just above or just outside of the indention we've created. So there we've got a nice little handle. And clearly from the reference image, we can see that there's these two little sub handles. I'm going to go ahead and just duplicate this because I like the width. Or do I want to? No, I'm going to just create a new cylinder because I already know the radius on this one, and we can just go smaller to like 0.2. So I'm going to create a new cylinder. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. And I'm going to go into its options and change the radius to 0.02 because this one was, if I remember correctly, was set to 0.03. Yes. So this is going to be a little smaller than this because these little cylinders sticking out look slightly smaller than the handle. And then I'm going to go ahead and before I shrink it, go in close. So I pressed F and I'm going to, actually, you know what would make this easier is if I didn't have this crate in the background. A really cool tip, if you want to look at just one thing, is to press, okay, that was weird. Okay, so I just realized that the recording stopped abruptly, and so I don't know where we left off. That really bites. I'm not sure why it did that. So I'm going to just undo some things. I had created a layer, and I'm going to just delete the layer, bring the crate back. I'm going to delete these little cylinders, and I'm just going to backtrack a little bit. So what I did was I created a cylinder. I assume this is when the tutorial stopped recording. Created a cylinder, and this is going to be for the little connectors on this cylinder handle. I'm going to rotate this about 90 degrees. And I'm going to change its inputs, its radius, to something smaller than this handle. So this handle, originally, before I deleted its history, would have said 0.03. I'm going to change this radius to 0.02. So it's a little smaller than this handle. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this cylinder handle, and I'm going to go into solo mode. I don't know if when the recording cut off, if we had covered solo mode before, but basically, you press Control 1, and when you do that, it isolates whatever you're selecting. So for a moment, especially when you have a really populated scene, you can focus in on one thing. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into face mode. So I'm going to click this, press Q, which is my select tool, right click, face. And I'm going to marquee select all of it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Control, which little minus sign pops up, and then just grab these middle faces. So if I go in and I press 4, that's wireframe, I can see the end caps of this cylinder. So what I'm going to do is press delete because we're not going to see those end caps. We don't need those faces, like populating and taking away from our poly count limit. I'm going to go ahead and press Control 1 and bring this back. I'm going to go back into object mode, which again, that's F8 is the shortcut, or you could just right click and hold down object mode. I'm going to go ahead and rotate this on the y-axis 90 degrees. There we go. And I'm going to shrink it down too, because it's not going to go that far. And then I'm going to move it so that it's closer to the handle. Go into side view. Ooh, I think it's way too far in. Let's bring that out a little more. There we go. So we can see it. See a little green circle? I'm going to move this so it's like kind of in the middle of this handle. And then I'm going to move it left. And based on my reference picture, this is super close to the edge of this handle, so I'm going to move it pretty close based on my reference. Go in here, make sure that, looks like this is, now it looks like it's intersecting both the handle and the box. So I can press 4 in wireframe and see that this is intersecting my handle. And then go over here and rotate around the box, and I can see that it's interacting with, or intersecting my box. Kind of long. So I'm going to press Control 1, grab its vertices. I can press Control 1 again and just kind of shrink this a little closer. Doesn't matter, just something I wanted to do. I'm going to go back into object mode, which on Mac, function F8. If you're on PC, it's just F8. And then instead of duplicating this and trying to position it as best I can just go Shift, right click, and go to Mirror and Options. Now I'm going to reset this so that it matches the defaults. And in Mirror Options, I don't want to cut geometry. I don't want it to mess with my geometry at all. I do want to copy. I do want it to mirror over the world axis because this thing was modeled in the very center of my grid. So I can just mirror over the grid. It looks like based on this little key down here at the bottom that I'm going to be mirroring over the z-axis. So I'm going to go click on Z, and then I'm going to, it's okay to combine with the original, I'm fine with that, but I don't want to merge border edges. I'm going to go say do not merge, and then I'm going to say mirror. And when I did that, I now have two handles that are equidistant from each other, or two little like handle connectors, I guess. All right, so this is about the end of the tutorial. It's already a half an hour long. We're going to move on to the second version. Before we do, let's do a little bit of cleaning up. I'm going to go ahead and save a new version of this. So File, Save As, create 3, and say handles. This is where I modeled the handles. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab everything and just delete my history. And I'm going to go ahead and put this crate in a layer. So I could name this cube crate, but I'm going to be doing more stuff to this crate. And so when I merge or combine, it's going to rename to something else anyway, so I'm just not going to worry about naming it right now. But I am going to put it in its own display layer. Over here in the channel box, remember if you don't see the channel box, just press Control A, or Control, I said A, yeah. Control A, you got Attribute Editor, channel box. And I'm just going to go click this little button down here under Display Layers. This one right here will add an object to a layer that's created. So I have this selected. In fact, if you hover, you can actually see the little definition if you forget which button does what. I click that and a new layer is created. If I click on the V for visibility, you see exactly what I've added to this layer. And I'm just going to name this crate underscore layer, LYR shorthand. So why call it crate layer as opposed to crate? Well, let's say I'm done with the crate and I want to name it crate in my outliner. If you can't see your outliner, this button right here is what activates the outliner. It's kind of like an itinerary list of everything in your scene. And so if I were to create a cube and name it crate, and there's a layer named crate, then Maya's just going to be like, no, you can name it crate 1, but this is already named crate. So I'm just going to call it layer with shorthand so I don't have any naming issues. And then I'm going to hide it. Now for these handles, I'm going to go ahead for now and just going to leave them the way they are. I can put them in their own group to make life a little easier. I'm not going to really name these right now. I'm just going to group them. And to group them, you press, on my Mac, it's Command G. I want to say on the PC, it's a Control G. But on the Mac, it's Command G. And if the hotkey isn't working for you, you can just go over here and Create and you can create an empty group and drag them into the group. That's another way to do it. So a group is just a little empty null object, for lack of a better term, and it can hold things. So I'm just going to call these my, see, I think that if I'm facing the box, I think this would be my left handle. So I know what these are. So I'm just, you know, right now it doesn't matter because there's not a lot in my scene, but the more populated your scene is, the more complex, the more you're going to really wish you organized things. And then I'm going to go ahead and put them in their own display layer, handle, and handle layer. Save. All right, so now I've got my handle in a layer, I've got my crate in a layer, my all my history's been deleted, everything's really nice and organized and tidy. So I'm going to go ahead and save this and end the tutorial here, and you guys can check in video 2, where we go into modeling this third bit here, and of course completing the crate, fencing the crate, making sure everything is looking terrific. So I will catch you in the next video.